They laughed the moment he walked in.
Not polite laughter, not restrained. It was the kind of laughter that echoes when people...
Marcus stood there, holding a single rusted car key, the only thing he had inherited.
Across the table, his stepbrothers signed property deeds and toasted champagne. Their eyes gleamed with certainty. They had the future in their hands.
And Marcus? He had a car. Old, barely running, smelling of oil and time gone by.
The lawyer cleared his throat. Marcus Reed! One item. A vehicle. Ethan leaned back, bored. Charles tapped his pen against the table. Laughter spilled across the room. Scrap metal, Charles sneered. Cold, whispered someone in the hallway. Guy got played, added another. Marcus didn't flinch. He nodded once, folded his hands, and rose. No scene. The weight of silence followed him outside.
There it waited, his father's car. The paint faded to tired gray. The mirror cracked like a thin smile. Dust streaked across the hood. Stale gasoline mixed with the faint scent of old rubber and a ghost of his father's cologne. The tow truck driver squinted. "You sure about this?" Marcus nodded. "Yes." Two teenagers filmed him from the street. "Bro, look at that bucket." A woman carrying groceries shook her head. "Shame." Marcus stayed calm, checked the straps twice, guided the tow into the narrow alley behind his building. Mrs. Lang leaned over her balcony. "Your daddy leave you that?" "Yes," Marcus said. "Treat it gentle," she warned. "Grief makes hands clumsy." Night came early. Marcus wiped the windshield, slid into the driver's seat, and turned the key. A gritty click. The engine coughed, then died. He didn't curse, didn't slam the wheel. He listened. A distant train horn carried across the quiet city. The metal ticked as it cooled. He opened the glove box. A brittle map, a parking stub, no letter. A sting rose behind his eyes. He missed his father. Not for the distance, not for the silence, but for the secrets buried beneath rust and oil. Across the alley, a boy on a scooter rolled by. "That yours?" "Yes," Marcus said. "Looks haunted," the boy said. Marcus almost smiled. "Maybe it is." He locked the car, pocketed the key, and looked up at the soft moon. Fine, let them laugh. Tomorrow, he would find someone who understood. Old engines. Tonight, he would let the car speak in silence, waiting for the story hidden beneath decades of dust and mockery. Because beneath the rust, beyond the laughter, there was something alive. Something that would change everything. Morning came without ceremony. Gray light slid through the alley like it didn't want to be noticed. Marcus was already awake. He stood beside the car, palm resting on the hood, feeling the cold metal seep into his skin. The city smelled of wet concrete and last night's fry oil. Somewhere nearby, a radio crackled awake. Life moved on, unaware that something important was about to be uncovered. Marcus checked the straps again. Twice. The tow truck driver yawned. "She's tired," he muttered. Marcus answered quietly, "So am I." They rolled through narrow streets until the buildings changed. Old brick, faded paint, handwritten signs that hadn't been updated in years. Finally, they stopped in front of a low workshop with a crooked sign that read, "Leia's Auto and Restoration. If it runs, we listen." Inside, the air was thick with oil, coffee, and patience. A blues station hissed softly through an old radio. Tools rested where hands expected them to be, not where they looked good. A tall woman in a denim shirt wiped her hands on a rag and looked up. "What are we looking at?" Marcus kept it simple. "My father's car. Barely runs." She walked around it once. Slow. Careful. Like she was circling a sleeping animal. "Name's Leia," she said, "and this isn't junk." That single sentence landed heavier than praise ever could. She popped the hood and leaned in, not rushing, not poking, She smelled the engine like it might confess something if treated gently. Not simple, she added, but not dead. From the back of the shop, an older man approached. Quiet, sharp eyes, hands that moved only when needed. Frank, Leia said, take a look. Frank crouched, flashlight cutting through shadow. He studied the chassis stamp, then the firewall, then a small, nearly invisible plate hidden beneath years of grime. He leaned back slowly. Huh. That was all he said, but the word carried weight. Leia noticed. What? Frank didn't answer. Instead, he slid back under the car. Mirror, he said. Numbers followed. Quiet. Careful. Frank read them out like a prayer. Leia repeated them. The shop went still. That matches an early run. Frank finally said, no drum roll. Just a fact. Marcus felt heat rise in his face, but it wasn't triumph. It was relief. Like something he'd felt his whole life, but never trusted enough to name. Leia traced a line beneath the bad paint. This crease only exists when somebody cared. A younger tech rolled over a cart. Pull the plugs. They worked without theater. No shouting. No music change. Just shared language and respect for a machine that had survived longer than most promises. Two customers whispered near the coffee station. I've seen that grill in a book. One said, you always say that. The other replied, but didn't look away. Frank slid out again. Original control arms. Hand stamped. Silence held. Then Leia spoke softly. Let's pull the rear seat. The bolts groaned. Dust filled the air like a held breath. And then, something slid free. An envelope. Yellowed. Thin. Marcus's name written in his father's blunt handwriting. The room froze. Marcus didn't open it. He slipped it into his jacket, heart pounding, not from fear but restraint. He wanted the truth from the metal first, not the words. They kept working. Badges were brushed clean with a toothbrush. Seized bolts loosened 1/4 turn at a time. Frank sketched notes with surgical neatness. Marcus held lamps, fetched trays, wiped grime from his hands and his thoughts. By noon, the shape beneath the dirt wasn't accidental anymore. Frank compared measurements. Once, twice, then again. If this is what I think it is, he said quietly, it doesn't belong in a backlot. Leia met Marcus's eyes. Next step is verification. Marcus nodded. The envelope pressed against his ribs like a heartbeat. Verification took a week. The car stayed behind a rope, half disassembled, half reborn. Experts came and went, whispering like doctors around a quiet patient. Measurements, photos, paint layers. Every time Marcus entered, voices dropped, then resumed softer. He didn't mind. At night, he traced the handwriting on the unopened letter with his thumb, memorized the curve of his father's M. It felt like the old man was still there, waiting to be earned. Then, one morning, a man in a dark coat arrived, a museum curator. He walked around the car once, slowly, thoroughly. Then he stopped. This is it, he said, a 1967 DAB prototype, lost for decades. He turned to Marcus. It shouldn't exist. Marcus swallowed. What does that mean? The curator smiled faintly. You'll find out. Within days, the world caught the scent. Car magazines called it the ghost find. Journalists hovered outside the shop. Offers came. Numbers climbed. Marcus ignored them all. That night, he finally opened the envelope. Inside was one page. To my son, Marcus, this carried me through debt, doubt, and humiliation. People saw rust. I saw survival. If you're reading this, you learned that lesson yourself. Don't sell it too fast. Let it breathe. Let it teach. When your brothers forget what matters, remind them with patience, not pride. The handwriting broke near the end. Marcus folded the letter carefully, like something fragile that had done its job. At dawn, he returned to the shop. Sunlight hit the car, just right, revealing silver beneath the dull gray. No longer hidden, no longer mocked. The museum made an offer. Permanent display. Royalties. Enough for a quiet life. Marcus accepted, on one condition. The plaque would carry his father's name. As the car was loaded for transport, Leia nudged him. You just went from broke to booked for interviews. Marcus smiled once. I'll pass. Behind them, the car sat silent, no longer coughing, no longer dying. Alive. And the truth at last was fully awake. Fame didn't arrive the way Marcus expected. There were no crowds at his door. No champagne. No sudden friends. Just envelopes. Clean. Plain. Delivered once a month. Museum royalties. Enough to breathe. Enough to plan. Enough to choose how to live, not how to survive. Marcus deposited the checks without ceremony. He didn't move apartments right away. Didn't buy anything flashy. He still walked to the shop most mornings, still wiped oil from his hands on the same rag, still listened more than he spoke. Frank finished the restoration with the patience of a man returning something sacred. Leia supervised every detail, refusing shortcuts. When the car finally took its place under museum lights, it looked nothing like the object of mockery from the lawyer's office. Silver body flawless, lines sharp, purpose undeniable. People stared at it like they were standing in front of a confession. Marcus attended the unveiling quietly. Flashbulbs popped. A curator spoke about rarity, value, history. Reporters whispered his name like it was fragile. In a corner, two men leaned toward each other. That's the guy they laughed at. One said, "Guess inheritance isn't always money," the other replied. Marcus didn't respond. He ran a finger along the hood one last time. Cool. Solid. Honest. Then he left. Weeks passed. The checks kept coming. Marcus bought a small house outside the city. Nothing grand. White siding. A narrow porch. A fence he fixed himself on weekends. Boards measured twice, nails driven slow. In the afternoons, neighborhood kids gathered nearby watching him work. "Can you teach me that?" one asked. So he did. Soon, broken bikes appeared. Bent rims. Slipping chains. Junk others had given up on. Marcus showed them how to listen before fixing, how to feel when something was off, how rushing ruins more than time. He never mentioned the museum. Never mentioned money. The lesson wasn't about success. It was about care. 6 months after the exhibit opened, Marcus leased an old warehouse near his father's old neighborhood. The roof leaked. The doors creaked. But the bones were good. He called it the workshop. No sign at first. Just open doors. Kids came. Parents followed. Tools clinked. Compressors hissed. Arguments broke out over engine timing like it mattered to the world. And slowly the place came alive. The past didn't knock politely. It arrived on a rainy afternoon. A black sedan rolled up outside the workshop. Too clean. Too quiet. The kind of car that didn't belong there. Two men stepped out. Ethan and Charles. No laughter now. Rain streaked their collars. Their shoes were expensive, but worn in the wrong places. Their eyes held the dull shine of people who'd reached the end of pretending. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and waited. Charles spoke first. "We need help." Marcus didn't answer immediately. The garage went quiet. Kids pretended not to listen, but no one missed a word. "What happened?" Marcus asked calmly. Ethan swallowed. "Bad loans. Taxes. The company's gone." Silence. Rain tapped against the roof like it was counting something. Marcus nodded once. "Sit." He poured coffee into chipped mugs. Steam rose between them, carrying the smell of engines and swallowed pride. "We were wrong," Charles said, eyes on the floor. Marcus watched the rain trace slow lines down the window. Dad warned you. Ethan looked up. You going to turn your back on us? Marcus shook his head. No, that surprised them more than anger would have. He told me to help if you ever lost your way, Marcus continued, but not to rescue you from work. He slid papers across the table. Schedules, lists, names. You start Monday. No titles, just effort. Ethan frowned. You're hiring us? Marcus met his eyes. No, I'm giving you a place to rebuild something honest. They didn't argue. They came back Monday, early, quiet. At first, their hands moved awkwardly, accustomed to signing papers, not lifting engines. But days have a way of shaping men. By week 3, Charles was under a car, grease on his cheek, joking with a teenager. Ethan managed inventory, slow and precise, learning what numbers actually cost. One afternoon, Leia stopped by from the museum. She watched the brothers working. Didn't think you'd go soft, she said. Marcus smiled faintly. Not soft, just finished learning what worth means. Word spread. Parents brought snacks. Kids brought broken things. Neighbors who once whispered now nodded. The workshop became a place people trusted. Months later, an invitation arrived from the museum, an anniversary event. Marcus went with his brothers. No suits, just clean shirts and steady posture. The hall glowed with quiet music and polished glass. The car stood perfect under the lights. A plaque beneath it read, Thomas Reed Legacy, proof that true wealth is built, not inherited. Ethan touched the plaque. He'd like this. Marcus nodded. He'd like that we finally got it. They stood there until closing. Outside, the night felt lighter. The guilt washed off in silence. Marcus looked back once. Through the glass, the car reflected 3 silhouettes, equal at last. The rust had burned away long ago, but the lesson stayed. Success has a strange echo. It doesn't shout forever. It fades, and what's left behind is who you are when nobody's watching anymore. By the time winter arrived, Marcus understood this better than anyone. The museum crowds thinned. The headlines moved on. Another lost treasure replaced his in the news cycle. The car remained perfect and still, but the noise around it softened. Marcus liked that. He preferred the sound of tools. The workshop now opened before sunrise. Lights flicked on one by one, casting long shadows across concrete floors. The smell of oil, steel, and fresh coffee mixed into something familiar, something earned. Kids showed up early, backpacks dropped in corners, hands already reaching for wrenches. Marcus didn't lecture. He demonstrated. Listen to it, he'd say, tapping an engine block. Machines talk. People just forget how to hear. Ethan and Charles worked alongside everyone else. No special treatment. No shortcuts. At first, some of the kids whispered, "Aren't those the rich guys?" Marcus never corrected them. He believed time would. One afternoon, a boy named Luis stayed behind after closing. He was quiet, always watched, rarely spoke. My mom says this place saved me, the boy said suddenly, eyes fixed on the floor. Marcus didn't answer right away. She says I was headed nowhere, but here things make sense. Marcus nodded. Things that work usually do. Luis hesitated. Why do you let broken people fix things? Marcus leaned against a workbench. Because broken things understand repair better than new ones. The boy smiled for the first time. The city began to notice. Not loudly, not officially, but police patrols slowed when passing the workshop. Teachers mentioned it in classrooms. Local papers ran small pieces buried on page 4. Community garage changes lives. No interviews with Marcus. Just photos of kids covered in grease, laughing. That was enough. The museum called again. This time they wanted more. A traveling exhibit. Marcus's story. Speaking engagements. A book deal. Even the curator met him inside the gallery, voice eager. People want inspiration. Marcus looked at the car, then at his reflection in the glass. I'm not an example, he said. I'm a process. The curator frowned. You could reach thousands. Marcus shook his head, gently. I'm already reaching the ones who show up. They compromised. The exhibit added a new section, not about Marcus, but about the workshop. Photos, names, smudged fingerprints scanned and framed. The plaque changed again. The read, legacy. Wisdom outlives wealth. Repair outlives pride. Winter turned to spring. One morning, Marcus arrived early and found Charles sitting alone on the steps, head in his hands. Everything okay? Marcus asked. Charles looked up. His eyes were wet but clear. I didn't know how heavy it was. What? Being wrong for so long. Marcus sat beside him. I spent years thinking winning meant being ahead of others, Charles continued. Turns out it just meant not falling apart alone. Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. Ethan changed too. He started teaching budgeting classes to parents in the neighborhood. No jargon, no shame, just honesty. This is how debt traps you, he'd say. And this is how patience frees you. People listened, because he spoke like someone who had paid the price. One evening, Mrs. Lang, the old neighbor from the apartment building, walked into the workshop with cookies wrapped in foil. I always knew that car wasn't junk, she said proudly. Marcus laughed. You also told me grief makes hands clumsy. She nodded. Still true. She looked around. Your father would have liked this noise. Marcus swallowed. I think he planned it. A year passed. The workshop expanded. Another bay. More tools. More lives brushing against something steady. Marcus stayed the same. Same calm walk. Same slow breath. Same habit of fixing fences himself. Across the street, people sometimes whispered, "That's the guy from the inheritance story." Others answered, "Yeah. Funny thing is, he never took revenge. No, he built something heavier. Something that stayed." On the anniversary of the museum exhibit, Marcus stood alone inside the gallery after hours. The lights dimmed. The hall emptied. He approached the car, not as an artifact, as a message. His reflection merged with his father's photo in the glass. For a moment, he imagined the old man beside him, hands in pockets, smiling without smiling. You figured it out, Marcus whispered. The silence felt like agreement. Outside, rain began again, soft, steady, honest. Marcus zipped his jacket and walked into the night. Behind him, the car remained still, not as a symbol of wealth, but as proof that humility, once learned, never rusts. Real tests don't arrive loudly. They don't come with threats or enemies. They arrive dressed as opportunity. By the second spring after the workshop opened, Marcus believed the hardest choices were behind him. He was wrong. It began with an envelope. No return address. Thick paper. Heavy seal. Inside was an invitation written in careful, confident language. A private investment group. Global reach. Long-term vision. They had followed his story. Not the car, but the workshop. They admired what he'd built. They wanted in. The proposal was simple on paper and dangerous in spirit. Funding to expand nationwide. Facilities in 5 cities. Salaries. Media partnerships. Naming rights. And one line Marcus read 3 times before setting the letter down. Operational leadership transition required. They wanted him to step back. Not removed. Just elevated. Founder. Visionary. Face. The work, they explained, would be handled by professionals. Marcus folded the letter and stared at the oil-stained floor. The workshop hummed around him. Tools clinked. Laughter rose and fell. A compressor kicked on. This place didn't need saving, but it could be scaled. That was the temptation. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat at the small kitchen table long after midnight, the letter beside his mug. Rain tapped the window. The city breathed outside. His phone buzzed. Leia, you okay? She asked. He hesitated. Someone wants to buy the soul of something they don't understand. She was quiet for a moment. That usually means it's valuable. That's what scares me. The meeting was scheduled anyway, not because Marcus wanted it, because ignoring truth doesn't make it disappear. The investors arrived in black cars. Clean shoes, clean hands. They toured the workshop, nodding politely, smiling where expected. One of them gestured to a group of kids rebuilding a transmission. Inspiring, he said, but inefficient. Marcus felt something tighten behind his ribs. They sat in the small office, walls lined with photos. Kids, families, grease-stained smiles. We can make this 10 times bigger, the lead investor said. You'd change thousands of lives. Marcus leaned back. At what cost? The man smiled. Control. You can't scale intimacy. Marcus glanced at the photo of his father on the wall. Then you can't scale meaning either. The smiles faded. Word spread quickly. The brothers noticed the tension before Marcus said anything. Ethan confronted him one evening as they locked up. You're thinking about leaving? Marcus shook his head. I'm thinking about protecting this place. Charles frowned. By handing it over? By refusing to let it become a product. Silence settled between them. Finally, Charles said quietly, if you step away, we lose the reason we changed. Marcus closed his eyes. That hurt more than the offer tempted. The kids sensed it too. Louis stopped joking. Others asked questions without asking them. Is this place closing? Are you moving? Are we still coming next week? Marcus answered everyone. Yes, it's open. No, I'm not leaving. Yes, you still belong here. But doubt lingers like smoke. The investors returned with pressure. Deadlines. Revised offers. Numbers bigger than before. This is how impact works, they insisted. Emotion doesn't scale. Marcus stood and opened the door. Then neither does trust, he said. They left frustrated. But the story didn't. A week later, an article appeared. Anonymous sources. Speculation. Workshop founder refuses millions, arrogance or integrity. Comments split the city. Some praised him. Others mocked him. Easy to say no when you're already rich. He's holding progress hostage. Should have taken the money. Marcus didn't respond. He went to work. One rainy afternoon, Mrs. Lang showed up again. She held the article in shaking hands. They don't get you, she said. Marcus smiled gently. They don't have to. She studied him. Your father once told me something. Marcus looked up. He said, if my son ever has to choose between growing fast and growing right, I hope he grows right. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Did he say that? She nodded. On the day he bought that car. That night, Marcus wrote a letter. Not to the investors, to the community. He posted it on the workshop door and online. No drama, no defense, just truth. This place was built to teach patience, not profit. It exists to rebuild people, not brands. We will grow only as fast as we can keep our hands dirty and our promises clean. That was it. Something unexpected happened. Donations came, not from corporations, but from locals. $10, $50, old tools, used lifts, a retired mechanic volunteered. Teachers offered classes. Parents cooked meals. The workshop didn't explode. It deepened. Months later, Marcus stood beside the car at the museum again. A child pressed their hand to the glass. Why didn't he sell it? The child asked their mother. The mother shrugged. Marcus smiled to himself. Some questions don't need answers. They need examples. That night, back at the workshop Marcus locked up last, the lights dimmed. The air cooled. He stood alone, listening to metal settle. He thought of the offer, the money, the reach, and then he thought of Luis tightening a bolt just right, of Ethan teaching patience, of Charles learning humility. This wasn't small. It was precise. Marcus turned off the lights. Outside, the city waited. Behind him, the workshop slept, whole, honest, untouched. The past doesn't always come to haunt you. Sometimes it comes to ask whether you've become the person it hoped you would be. It arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. No warning, no drama, just a knock on the workshop door at 8:12 a.m., before the compressors warmed, before the kids arrived, before the day could pretend it would be simple. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and opened the door. The man standing there looked tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Mid-50s, gray creeping into dark hair, shoulders still broad but sloped by time. He held a folder tight to his chest. "Marcus Reed?" the man asked. "Yes." The man swallowed. "My name is Daniel Cross. I knew your father." That name hit like a dropped wrench. Marcus stepped aside. They sat in the small office, the same one the investors had tried to buy with polished words. Daniel Cross didn't look around much. He kept his eyes low, as if the walls themselves might judge him. "I didn't come for the car," he said quickly. "I swear that's not why I'm here." Marcus said nothing. Silence is sometimes the kindest response. Daniel took a breath. "Your father saved my life." Marcus looked up. Financially, Daniel added, "and morally, if I'm being honest." The folder trembled in his hands. Years ago, long before the inheritance, before the brothers, before the workshop, Daniel Cross had been a partner. Not officially, unofficially. He and Thomas Reed had worked on a small manufacturing deal. Engines, parts, risky margins. When the market turned, Daniel panicked. He made decisions that saved himself and crushed Thomas. Legal decisions. Clean ones. But not fair. "I let him take the fall," Daniel said, voice rough. "I told myself it was business. I told myself he'd recover." Marcus felt the old anger stir. But it didn't rise. It waited. "He didn't," Daniel continued. "Not fully. But he never exposed me. Never said my name." Daniel finally looked up. His eyes were wet. "I came here because I heard what you built. And because there's something I've carried for 20 years. He slid the folder across the desk. Inside were documents, bank records, contracts, proof, clear, undeniable proof that Thomas Reed had been sacrificed. And at the bottom, a notarized statement. Daniel's confession. "I want you to have it," he said. "If you release this, it will ruin me. But it will clear your father's name completely." The room felt smaller. Marcus leaned back slowly. "You could have stayed silent," he said. Daniel nodded. "I know." "So, why now?" Daniel's voice broke. "Because I watched you refuse millions to protect kids who aren't even yours. And I realized I don't deserve peace if I keep hiding." Marcus closed the folder. For a long moment, he didn't speak. The workshop buzzed faintly outside. Life continuing unaware. Finally, Marcus asked the question Daniel feared most. "What do you want from me?" Daniel exhaled. "Nothing." A pause. "Except permission to stop running." The brothers arrived later that morning. Marcus told them everything. Every word. Ethan's jaw tightened. "We could destroy him." Charles nodded. "Publicly. Completely." Marcus watched them carefully. Once they would have enjoyed that. Now they hesitated. "He deserves it," Ethan said. "Does he?" Marcus asked, "Or does he deserve to finally tell the truth?" Silence. Then Charles said quietly, "What did Dad do?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "He carried it, so no one else had to." That night, Marcus returned to the museum alone. The hall was empty. Lights dimmed. The car stood exactly as always, perfect, silent, patient. Marcus placed his palm against the glass. You left this with me, he whispered. Not the car. The choice. He imagined his father's voice, not answering, just listening. The decision wasn't quick or easy. Marcus consulted a lawyer, not to plan revenge, but to understand consequences. He spoke to Leia, to Mrs. Lang, to the kids, without details, asking questions about fairness, truth, forgiveness. One kid said, if someone fixes what they broke, do they still get punished? Another said, only if they lie again. Marcus smiled. Children understand justice better than adults. Daniel returned a week later. Marcus handed the folder back. Daniel froze. You're not using it? No, Marcus said, but I'm not hiding it either. He slid a single page forward. A copy. This stays sealed, Marcus said, unless you ever deny the truth, or try to erase it. Daniel nodded, tears falling freely. I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. Marcus stood and offered his hand. Then do that. The story didn't break headlines. No expose. No redemption arc for public consumption. Just quiet repair. Daniel donated anonymously to the workshop, funded scholarships, paid debts he never had to admit publicly, and never once asked for recognition. Months later, Marcus added a new plaque to the workshop wall. Not a name, just words. Integrity is what you do when power is offered and forgiveness is harder. The brothers read it silently. Ethan finally said, you could have ended him. Marcus nodded. But then we'd still be living in the shadow of what we hate. On the anniversary of the workshop's opening, Marcus stood before the kids. No speech, just a story. About a man who was wronged. About a man who stayed silent. About another man who finally spoke. And about choosing, Marcus said, what kind of ending you want to live with. That night, Marcus locked up last again. As always, he stood in the doorway, lights off, listening to the building breathe. The past had come back. Not to take, not to punish, but to see if the lessons survived. Marcus turned the key. It did. By the time the crowd sees Damon Williams step onto the field, the hardest battles have already been fought. Not against opponents, not under stadium lights, but in silence. What separates good players from great ones is not talent. It is what they do when no one is watching, and Damon understands this truth deeply. Behind the calm expression and composed body language lives a relentless inner discipline, a constant conversation between ambition and restraint. Every season begins the same way, not with hype, but with honesty. He sits with his performance data, medical reports, and training footage. He studies his own weaknesses as carefully as opponents study him. Speed margins, reaction time, decision-making under fatigue. Nothing is ignored. Improvement for Damon is not emotional. It is deliberate. The physical grind is unforgiving. Early mornings when the body still aches from the previous day. Training sessions that push lungs and legs to the edge. Strength work that demands precision, not ego. He trains for durability, not just dominance. Power without control has no place in his game. Recovery becomes a second profession. Ice baths are not a trend for him. They are routine. Stretching is methodical. Physio sessions are detailed and preventative, not reactive. He understands that availability is value. A player who cannot stay fit cannot stay relevant. Longevity is a form of intelligence, but the most intense work happens mentally. Pressure does not arrive suddenly. It builds slowly, expectations, comparisons, headlines, criticism. Early in his career, doubts followed him closely. Questions about consistency, about adaptability, about whether he could truly handle the biggest moments. Those doubts did not break him. They trained him. Damon learned how to separate noise from information. Not every opinion deserves space. Not every criticism deserves reaction. Emotional control became one of his greatest weapons. He does not rush moments. He absorbs them. When mistakes happen, and they always do, he does not hide from them. He reviews them, understands them, corrects them, then moves forward without carrying emotional baggage. Resilience for him is not dramatic. It is quiet persistence. Away from the field, balance becomes essential. His home is not built for attention. It is built for recovery, clarity, and routine. Clean spaces, minimal distractions, a place where the pace slows down. This is where he reconnects with himself, away from cameras and commentary. Family presence matters deeply here. They remind him of who he was before the game defined him. Conversations are grounded. Laughter is real. Fame does not enter these rooms. Respect and humility stay intact. Cars, for Damon, remain symbolic, not excessive. Each vehicle represents a chapter, not a flex. A reward for discipline. A reminder that progress is earned. He chooses cars the same way he plays rugby. Powerful, efficient, controlled. No unnecessary noise. No reckless display. Comfort matters because recovery matters. Control matters because discipline matters. Yet, even success carries responsibility. Young players watch him closely. Teammates observe his habits. Coaches trust his preparation. Leadership, he knows, is not always vocal. Often, it is behavioral. Showing up early. Training fully. Recovering properly. Respecting staff. Respecting the game. That consistency builds trust. And trust builds legacy. As seasons pass, Damon's understanding deepens. He no longer chases validation. He chases mastery. Every match becomes a lesson. Every setback becomes data. Every win becomes temporary motivation, not destination. He knows the truth many never accept. Careers are short, but reputations last. What he is building goes beyond highlight reels. It is a reputation of reliability, of mental strength, of professionalism, of respect for the craft. When the stadium empties and the noise fades, Damon Williams returns to the same routine, same discipline, same focus, same hunger. Because greatness is not a moment. It is a lifestyle repeated daily. And the quiet war continues, unseen, uncelebrated, but decisive. Every elite career reaches a point where effort is no longer the question. The question becomes survival. For Damon Williams, that moment did not arrive with applause or celebration. It arrived quietly, disguised as fatigue, tightness, and small warning signs the body gives before it demands to be heard. At first, he ignored them. That is what high performers do. They push. They rationalize pain. They tell themselves it will loosen up, that this is just part of the grind. And for a long time, Damon had trained himself to endure discomfort without hesitation. But this was different. The recovery took longer. The sharpness came back slower. Small movements required more focus. Nothing dramatic. Nothing headline-worthy. Just enough to introduce doubt, the most dangerous opponent of all. Damon had built his career on availability and consistency. Now, for the first time, those foundations felt uncertain. Medical evaluations followed. Scans, monitoring, controlled workloads. Conversations became more cautious. Not alarmist, but honest. The kind of honesty that forces reflection. For the first time in years, he had to confront a reality many athletes fear. The body does not negotiate forever. Training changed. Intensity was no longer measured only by output, but by intelligence. Sessions became more selective. Every rep had purpose. Every sprint was calculated. The goal was no longer to prove toughness, it was to protect longevity. That adjustment was not easy. Mentally, it was harder than any physical session he had ever endured, because slowing down feels like losing momentum. And in elite sport, momentum is identity. There were days when frustration crept in, watching others push harder, feeling slightly behind, wondering if the window was narrowing, wondering if people noticed the change. But this is where Damon's true strength revealed itself. He chose patience over panic. Instead of fighting the process, he mastered it. He studied recovery science the same way he studied match footage, sleep cycles, nutrition timing, nervous system regulation, mental decompression. He learned that peak performance is not built only in the gym, it is protected everywhere else. Pressure returned in a different form. Not external criticism, internal expectation. Could he still deliver when it mattered most? Could he trust his body under maximum stress? Could he step into big moments without hesitation? Those questions followed him into every match. And yet, when the whistle blew, something remarkable happened. His game became cleaner, decisions sharper, movements more efficient. He stopped wasting energy. He started controlling space with intelligence rather than force. Experience filled the gaps where raw physicality once dominated. This was evolution. Damon realized something profound. Peak performance is not about doing more, it is about doing what matters. Leadership deepened during this period. Teammates noticed the calm, the discipline, the refusal to rush. Younger players leaned in closer, asking questions, watching routines, learning how professionalism looks when things are not perfect. Coaches trusted him more, not less, because reliability is not the absence of struggle, it is consistency through it. Off the field, reflection intensified. He spent more time alone, thinking, writing, planning. The idea of career-length legacy and life beyond rugby became real, not distant. Cars, once symbols of progress, now carried another meaning: time, moments, freedom. He drove slower, thought deeper, appreciated silence more. Home became sanctuary, not a place to escape reality, but a place to prepare for it. Family conversations grew more intentional. Gratitude replaced assumption. He understood that everything he had built could only be sustained with respect for limits. And then came the test. A high-pressure match, tight margins, heavy expectations, the kind of moment that exposes doubt instantly. Damon stepped onto the field, not fully certain, but fully prepared. Every recovery session, every disciplined choice, every patient adjustment led here. When the moment arrived, he did not force it. He trusted it, and in that trust, his performance spoke louder than confidence ever could. Controlled, composed, intelligent, impactful, not flashy, effective. The result mattered. But what mattered more was what Damon learned. He was no longer chasing proof. He was operating from understanding. This phase of his career was no longer about becoming great. It was about staying great without losing himself. The game had tested him differently this time, not with speed or power, but with restraint and wisdom. And Damon Williams passed that test quietly, because the strongest competitors are not those who ignore limits. They are the ones who learn how to move within them and still dominate. For Damon Williams, silence used to mean rest, recovery. Peace after work was done. But as his career matured, silence carried weight, the weight of expectation, of influence, of knowing that his presence alone now shaped outcomes beyond the scoreboard. He was no longer just a player measured by performance. He was a reference point. Young athletes watched how he trained, how he spoke, how he reacted under pressure. Coaches measured culture against his discipline. Media narratives subtly shifted, no longer asking if he would perform, but how long he could maintain his standard. Legacy had entered the conversation, whether he invited it or not. And legacy is heavy, because it forces uncomfortable questions. How long can I give at this level? What does leadership really demand now? Am I building something that lasts beyond me? These thoughts followed him everywhere, in locker rooms, during travel, in moments of quiet before sleep. They were not distractions. They were signals that his role had evolved. He understood something most athletes realize too late. When you become influential, your decisions ripple outward. Training choices affected team rhythm. Emotional control affected morale. Even restraint became leadership. There were moments when he wanted to push harder, speak louder, demand more, but experience told him when to hold back. Authority no longer came from volume. It came from consistency. This was not always comfortable. Leadership isolates. There were days he felt misunderstood, moments when he absorbed criticism silently to protect unity, times when he made unpopular decisions for long-term stability rather than short-term approval. He learned that being respected does not always feel rewarding in the moment. Sometimes it feels lonely, but Damon never confused loneliness with doubt. He trusted his internal compass, the one shaped by years of discipline, failure, resilience, and restraint. He knew who he was when no one was watching. That knowledge anchored him when external noise grew louder. The pressure intensified. Matches carried symbolic weight. Every big performance was framed as confirmation. Every quiet game magnified. Commentary followed patterns he could not control. He stopped reading most of it, not out of arrogance but clarity. External validation had never built him. It would not sustain him now. Instead, he narrowed his focus. Process over praise. Preparation over perception. Impact over image. His relationship with the game deepened during this phase. Rugby was no longer something he tried to conquer. It was something he respected. He studied opponents differently. He conserved energy intentionally. He communicated more. He trusted teammates more. The need to prove had softened into the desire to elevate. This shift made him dangerous in a new way. Not explosive, inevitable. Opponents prepared specifically for him. Defensive systems adjusted. Strategies were built around limiting his influence. Yet even when neutralized statistically, his presence altered matches. Space opened. Pressure shifted. Confidence spread. Legacy works like that. It changes the geometry of competition. Off the field, responsibility expanded. Requests increased. Advice was sought. Younger players confided fears he recognized from his own past. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, his words carried precision. He never pretended to have all the answers. He shared truths instead. That success does not remove fear, it refines it. That discipline is quieter than motivation. That longevity demands humility. These were not slogans. They were lived realities. There were nights when exhaustion was not physical, but emotional. Carrying expectation requires strength most people never see. Damon learned to protect his inner world fiercely. He guarded his energy, curated his circle, prioritized people who told him the truth, not what sounded good. Family remained the constant. Their presence reminded him who he was before recognition, before responsibility, before expectations had names. Conversations stayed grounded. Laughter stayed real. Perspective stayed intact. That balance mattered more now than ever, because the closer you get to legacy, the easier it is to lose yourself trying to shape it. Damon refused to chase an image. He focused on integrity. If his career ended tomorrow, he wanted one thing to be undeniable, that he gave the game everything without letting it take everything from him. This mindset influenced a crucial decision, not dramatic, not public, but defining. He chose sustainability over excess. Not fewer goals, fewer compromises. Not less ambition, more alignment. It was a decision that would quietly determine how his story would be remembered. As a competitor who burned brightly and vanished, or as one who adapted, endured, and elevated others along the way? The answer was forming daily in discipline, patience, and restraint. Legacy, he realized, is not built in highlights. It is built in habits. And Damon Williams was shaping his carefully, not for applause, but for permanence. The stadium lights flickered on, cutting through dusk like precise blades. Damon Williams stood at the edge of the pitch, breathing in the scent of wet grass, chalk, and the faint tang of metal from the stands. Every noise, every distant cheer, every murmur of anticipation felt amplified. He had played here countless times, but tonight was different. Tonight was not about performance alone. It was about culmination. He glanced at the locker room behind him, at the worn benches, the stacks of taped-up boots, the faded motivational posters curling at the corners. Every match, every drill, every injury and recovery had led to this. Every sleepless night, every choice to prioritize process over perception, every sacrifice quietly stacked, layer by layer, had prepared him. And yet the anxiety clung. Legacy has a weight. Not the heavy gold of trophies or contracts, but the weight of living up to yourself. He tightened his gloves, ran a hand over his jaw, and inhaled deep. The crowd's hum built into a roar, a wave of collective expectation that he could neither ignore nor fully control. Opposing teams stretched, strategized, recalculated, all aware of the influence he carried. His name alone shifted defensive alignments, created gaps, opened possibilities. It was both flattering and isolating. Walking onto the field, he felt the familiar rhythm of impact, cleats on turf, heartbeat against ribs, breath in measured rhythm. But tonight, it was a meditation, not a race. Every step deliberate, a confirmation of discipline, an acknowledgement of the journey. The first whistle pierced the air. Time slowed. Opponents surged. Fans rose. The game demanded instinct. Yet he felt a strange clarity. He moved with precision rather than panic, with strategy rather than reaction. Teammates responded intuitively to his guidance, to the aura he had cultivated silently over years. He was not commanding with authority alone. He was transmitting a confidence built from a lifetime of endurance, learning, and restraint. Halfway through, the ball found him in open space. In another life, he might have rushed, trying to prove speed, power, or brilliance. Tonight, he paused for a fraction, measured the field, and passed not for applause, but for impact. The play unfolded beautifully. Every movement felt inevitable, as if the game itself bent to the preparation, patience, and choices he had invested. Then came the moment that defined more than the match. A critical penalty, one misstep could cost the team the championship. Opponents pressed, eyes sharp, muscles coiled, ready to exploit. Damon approached, no hesitation. He remembered all the lessons, resilience through doubt, trust in his process, the quiet voice of discipline over the roar of ego. The kick sailed, split the posts, and the stadium erupted. Cheers not just for him, but for the collective, for the preparation, for the journey. He exhaled, not relief, but acknowledgement, not triumph, but understanding. The game ended. Victory etched, yes, but the real victory lay in how it had been earned. Intentionally, consistently, with clarity of purpose. Later, in the quiet of the locker room, the noise faded, leaving the soft echo of footsteps and the faint smell of sweat and liniment. Damon sat alone for a moment, helmet in hand, sweat streaked, muscles weary, mind alive. This was the reward not written in stat sheets or headlines, but in knowing he had honored the process, honored his teammates, and most of all, honored himself. Outside, reporters swarmed. Flashbulbs ignited like staccato lightning. Questions shouted. Offers of interviews. Requests for commentary. Damon smiled faintly, polite, but reserved. He had learned long ago that attention is a tool, not a measurement. He chose what to feed and what to leave untouched. At home, the night was calm. His family waited, unassuming, their presence grounding him. Their laughter, their warmth, a simple reminder that legacy begins with the people who see you first, who see you honestly. He hugged them longer than usual. The reflection in the window caught his eye. A man shaped by discipline, endurance, and integrity. Not perfect, not unscarred, but complete. Every misstep, every setback, every doubter. All necessary parts of the mosaic. All necessary for understanding that life is not about avoiding challenge, but transforming it. The years ahead would bring new matches, new pressures, new expectations. Yet, Damon Williams felt ready. He had learned the final lesson that defines the truly great, that success is fleeting, influence is temporary, but legacy, the quiet, unseen, intentional impact of discipline, humility, and purpose that endures. And so, as the city lights glittered against the night sky, he walked forward with measured steps, heart steady, mind clear. Every moment of the journey had mattered. Every struggle had shaped him. Every choice had built the bridge from doubt to certainty, from mockery to respect, from ambition to meaning. Behind him, the stadium stood silent, the field resting. Ahead, life awaited, vast, uncharted, ready to be met with the same calm, deliberate, resilient spirit he had carried all along. Sometimes, the story isn't in the triumph itself. It's in the careful construction of the man who earns it. And for Damon Williams, the story had only proven one thing. The greatest victories are measured not by applause, but by the strength, integrity, and clarity with which they are lived.